As mentioned, one of the best ways to learn terms and definitions is repetition. Go over them until you have them down. Then try this. Take the content bulletin and item by item, see if you can define them. For example, one of the listed items is representations. Remember, representations are statements made on an application for insurance that are true to the best of one's knowledge. If there's an inaccuracy on an application and the carrier considers it misrepresentation, the carrier must determine whether it's material or immaterial. Or has a misrepresentation crossed over into fraud, which in turn will help you remember how fraud is defined. We started off with a look at basic terms like indemnification, risk, and exposure. Remember, each of these has their own sub-definitions or topics, like the different types of risk, pure and speculative, or like the 3 different types of hazards that we explored, physical, moral, and morale. It's important to know the specifics of each to separate them for test purposes. Also remember, there are many ways risk can be handled. For example, it can be kept under the retention method, or the risk can be transferred to someone more willing or able to bear the risk. We continued with the section on elements of an insurable risk, such as adverse selection. A carrier doesn't like being selected adverse to their own best interest. We also talked about reinsurance, which is basically insurance on insurance. We looked at different types of agents and carriers, such as independent captive and exclusive agents, who only sell for one insurance company. Private and government coverages were discussed, as well as admitted versus non-admitted insurers, and you learned that retail agencies are different from general agencies. The lesson then examined domestic, foreign, and alien insurers. We followed that with a look at independent financial rating systems and how they rate the strength of insurers. That section closed with how marketing and distribution systems have changed and grown over the years, especially with the advent of the internet and the growth of social media platforms. Then we got into producers, their responsibilities, and the law of agency. These are the laws and concepts that define the legal stature of producers and their relationships with the client and insurance companies. Remember that as a producer, you legally represent your principal, the insurance company. We also examined contracts and the elements they must have to be legally enforceable in court. There are unilateral, bilateral, and multilateral contracts. Insurance policies are unilateral contracts. It's only drawn up by one party, the insurance company. The insured has no input as to how the policy was written, nor authority to modify or change anything in the policy. This section finishes with studying characteristics that are somewhat unique to insurance contracts, such as contracts of adhesion. We also looked at aleatory contracts. This specifies that an insurance policy is a personal contract, as it insures people and not things. Remember that the insurance policies are conditional in nature. You saw that both insured and carriers are required to meet certain policy conditions in order for everything to work out in the end. The last section covered legal interpretations that have affected the business. Unclear and ambiguous contract language and the doctrine of reasonable expectation go hand in hand, and it's important to relate them to each other. Remember, the concept of indemnification is important. We also delved into what representations are, the ramifications of misrepresentation, and how fraud can cancel out a policy even if it's been enforced for decades. Remember the difference between a representation and a warranty. Representations are statements that are true to the best of knowledge, but warranties are a promise of truth. If something is warranted to be true, it must be true. Finally, you learn that concealment is the hiding or omission of material information. And just because something wasn't revealed doesn't mean it didn't happen.